You're listening to the Modern Motherhood Podcast from AllMomDoes. I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and it's my hope that you'll find on the podcast encouragement, inspiration, and tools for the life you're living, the kids you're raising, the romance you're loving, and the work you're doing. Does it ever feel sometimes like your life moves from one drama to a challenge to a drama over and over again? Well, my guest today, her life has had so many dramatic and difficult twists and turns, and she'd probably be the first one to tell you that where her business and life is today is not something she would have imagined in the middle of so much challenge. She's Tiffani Kilgore, founder of House of Belonging and author of Misfit Table. So Tiffani, thanks so much for being with us today.
No, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to be with you. And give us a little history of you. Tell us who Tiffani is and where you got to in this day and age today.
I'm just from a small town in Missouri, in the heart of the country. And I grew up very ordinary, really nothing out of the normal. Always felt like something was wrong with me. I didn't know what it was. I've carried it around since I can remember. And that just really bled into every area of my interior life and then out into my exterior life until what I can only see looking back and running over the story is that God found me and I let him. And it's been that process of writing with him up until today.
I love that God, you letting him catch you. I mean, I think that's just amazing. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful way to put it. And in these years that have intervened, this feeling that something was wrong with you, where did you see that played out in your personal life as you navigated through childhood and then into adulthood?
That's such a loaded question for a deep-ended person. But just the first thing that comes to my mind is when people would look at me, and that started in school. Like, for example, I was in gymnastics class. I was probably 8, and I had to run down the mat to the horse, and you had to like straddle over a horse. And the first time I did it, I was so humiliated that people were actually looking at me that I couldn't do it. It was those things that just people's eyes on me hurt my emotions. I don't know how else to explain it. So it really turned me inward. Like I felt like I couldn't do anything right. And so it just really kept me very, very small. And it just affected a lot of things, I think, looking back, obviously,
Do you feel like that in your family of origin, that sense of feeling like something was wrong was only exacerbated by the messaging you were getting family of origin? Or do you feel like there were those who tried to pull you out of it? Where did that play in?
Yeah, I think the family of origin definitely heightened it and exacerbated it for sure. Because there was so much, just that generational chaos. I ain't even saying dysfunction because we're all broken. We all have that inner beast, so to speak, inside of us, more like a heart sickness. I don't think anybody knew how to help. And I don't think we knew how to help ourselves as a family, but let alone how to help me. And I think how is the big question for today, that we just don't know how in so many ways.
One of the things that I discover in ministering to women in where I live is I think we've gotten much better at standing up in this day and age and saying, I'm broken, I know I have issues, and yet trying to get people transitioned from that place into a how we move on from that brokenness has proven really tricky because there's sort of this dynamic at play now of, no, I've owned my brokenness. Like, here I am in my brokenness. And I'm like, well, it's not the only destination available. So I think, give me the tangent, because I think that we have made major strides in understanding how to identify where we're broken, but that's not the ultimate destination.
I feel like a misfit is someone who disrupts the natural order of things. This is a new thing that God's showing me, in that we are modern day Jesus followers, people who take God at his word because they have no other option, which is where I found myself ultimately, because there was no human that can intervene in our pain. All of us have it. It's like that secret person inside, basically. And there was no human that could do that. And I feel that what's happening today in the church culture is that God is calling up the misfits to disrupt the natural order of the church. And he's actually taking us back to his ancient, to our Jewish roots of our Christianity, because it's there that I'm finding the how.
I love that.
That's a lot of stuff. It's the how, in that we're not mostly going to find it anymore in a church building. It's because God is bringing it back and he's actually turning it right side up. And this is where I say that the table is not a trend, because what happens in our culture is, and especially in Christian culture, is we say one word and it's like the next new thing. So everybody jumps on it and just creates the heck out of it, writes 50 million books about it and all of these other things. But really, it's a real table, and it's God's word is the table. And so he's turning it all right side up, and it's the only place that we can find. He is the only safe person to get the help, because first we have to have those safe places in order to tell the truth about ourselves. Because for me, when I was writing the book, I didn't know this going into writing a book, obviously, but as I started writing, it was like me vomiting up my whole guts, my whole everything inside about myself, for God to then sort out. It was like the invitation from him to feel the pain, for me to stay in the pain and feel it and feel it and feel it. And that was part of the how. It's so exciting, so hard to explain. It's so new to me in some ways that I'm just really exploring it with him. I'm letting him take me to these places, because I feel like in the Hebrew language, it's the how. Jesus taught very specifically. Like when I went to Israel, he pointed to things. He was a show and tell. You could see it and the dots connected, and you go, oh my gosh, that's what's starting to happen as I began studying in this new way from the Middle Eastern lens. Everything starts clicking.
Yes, and I love the title of your new book, The Misfit Table. It's The Misfit Table, Let Your Hunger Lead You to Where You Belong. And I think this speaks into exactly what you're saying about the how, is that we have become a culture that wants to anesthetize very quickly. Mm-hmm. And so either we have a very difficult time understanding that we're even in pain, we don't even realize we have outside effect that we know something can't quite be right, but we're not actually dealing with what the pain is, or we discover the pain, but then we create sort of a new numbing of it, and then we just sort of lay it all out there, let the air get to it, and then we don't really do anything with it. And that becomes a numbing again in and of itself. This is just me, here it just is. And so I think that willingness to really delve in and to let it be painful for however long it needs to be painful does end up having these really amazing healing effects if it's done with God. Now, I love what you bring up. Table's the new hot word. It is definitely the new black, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're hearing this word a lot. I know that, for example, within the IF conference, Jenny Allen's been on the show before. Susie Davis is a friend of mine. The table, it was amazing to see what began to happen with the IF gathering, and it all hinged around this idea of coming around the table. I love that your heart is for the table. We actually have a new fellowship here in Austin that has started that is called The Table. So clearly there is, here's the deal. It's either that it's on trend or it really is a God move. And I know that you're going to really believe it's a God move. So how did he bring you to this place of understanding that table, it's about him?
The table, actually, for me, I didn't even know that when we started writing the book, it was working title was Belonging. And halfway through the thing, God started writing, because I didn't know my story. So actually, when I was writing the book, God was giving me my story live time, really. And when I was 30 is when I began to go to the kitchen table every day. That's where I had my quiet time. And the kids will attest, I had my Bible, my notebooks, my journals. I mean, the kitchen table was always cluttered with my stuff. So that for me was where it came from, because that's where it happened. And later on in my studies and life, you begin to learn that the table is the altar. Biblically, Hebraically, it's the altar. Like when Abraham was going and he'd build an altar,
right.
It's a table. It's another word for that. So it's interesting.
I love that altar and table are synonymous, and that, when we are willing to, even Jesus, this invitation to come to the table for communion, that's really, we have an altar call, but really what we're saying is come to the table together. Now, I want you to define, because I want to hear your definition for it, this idea of misfit. Now, in my heart, old school Rudolph and the Island of Misfit Toys. I was always the kid who was like, that's me, that island. I understand, I get those toys. And I do see, for example, in, say, young adult fiction, there's this huge move with titles like Divergent and Twilight, some of the others, that it's that place, those people who don't feel like they fit anywhere, who then find this community. So how does misfit feel to you? Because those are the things that come to my mind when I think of misfit.
Yeah, I think the first way I defined misfit was a person who takes God at his word, takes, eats, and acts. So it's actually a person who acts on God's word. What God speaks, they act on, which actually is faith, because they have no other option. That was kind of the first definition, so to speak, for misfit. But also I'm thinking that now's the time for the misfits to take their place at the table, because misfits are people who feel deep. They are deep in people. They see way under the surface. They feel people. They see people. Very often the creative people. As children, they're often seen as what people would think would weird, or they're, back when I was in high school, it was what they called emos, where they dyed their hair all black and they're tattooed, they're pierced. They feel so much that they don't know what to do with it. They think there's something wrong with them. So that's a whole nother. But God, I believe, is really saying it's time for you guys to come to the table, because it's often the misfit that does disrupt, that walks to the beat of a different drum and is not afraid to go off the beaten path, to be the yes sayer, the, wrecking ball, the game changer, all those different things. It's that person.
I think that's such a great way of looking at who we want to make sure, because so often we tend to, in our faith communities, only want to include people who feel familiar to us. Mm-hmm. And we can unconsciously be doing it. We can create rules about coming to the table that we don't even realize we've created, that can be, in a way, sort of limiting to letting everyone come to the table and have a voice. And so I think that definition is so very powerful. Now, I love that you distinguished that you started out thinking that the title of the book was going to be Belonging, because, girl, that's right on brand with House of Belonging. I mean, that would just fit right into your business that a lot of people are going to be familiar with you by. So tell me what House of Belonging is and how it got started.
Yeah, it started out with words, because I love those. I mean, they've always spoke to me from a child on. So it really was like, how could we put words on things that would encourage people that were in pain, that didn't feel seen, all those things. And so it kind of started like that, and got started actually putting on coffee filter wreaths, and then moved to wood signs, and it just kind of stuck. But under the surface of that House of Belonging, God was putting that in me. It's always been about the words, but the word is always seeking to be made flesh. He's wanting to put it in us. And those words, as they embody us, that it changes us from the inside out. And so that's the whole process until the day we go home.
I love that. And the fascination with words is one that I definitely share with you. And I think that there's something so profound in the human experience about seeing words, seeing people respond to it. Even the typology that is on those words has this deep, deep impact. I was reflecting, I thought, your signature style, it's such clean surfaces with such powerful words, but underneath all of that, through your own testimony, you say it was just a messy canvas of all kind of words that were not life-giving. I love how you have flipped the script on that. And I think there's really this calling about being sign makers in people's lives. When did you begin to realize that you were sort of moving into a space that, yes, it was home decor, but it was so much more than that?
Oh gosh, it was so much more than that. And I always sensed that. I think that was part of my tension, was I am not about home decor, because I wasn't. It's about the words. And that would always frustrate me, because when we first went on with a blog, it was about trying to refurbish things and to fit in with what everybody was doing, when that really was never my heart. I love home decor, but it's not my passion. It's, so it was always the words. And a frustration that I still have today is, I think organically it's kind of changed over. House of Belonging used to be more home decor, but I think if signs have, so many sign makers are around now, and big box stores sell them for $15.99. The handmade sign isn't what it used to be, but the words still are. Again, I'm actually navigating that in this whole new season of life, of what that looks like. And it's kind of funny, because I think for House of Belonging, that's, for me, inside, that's been like my foundation. Now God says, okay, now we're going to build some walls, and we're going to put some rooms in, and we're going to, inside me. So kind of navigating this wholeness that he's doing, and this restoration that he's doing within me, and then within my family.
I think that's amazing. You have one saying that you've had on pillows and various things that I love, that says wanted and wild. I think that is such a great call for a lot of women who feel like they're too much and they're not enough. Like they're too much of one thing and not enough of the other. I think that encapsulates it so beautifully. On this whole theme of words, I was stalking your Instagram feed, as one does, and you recently put up a quote there that I thought was so gorgeous. It said, "I'm exhausted with the new thing. Give me the old thing, the ancient thing." I wanted you to unpack that just a little bit, because I know you've recently been to Israel, and so I thought, I want to hear the story behind that particular quote.
Yeah, I have an ancientness in my bones. I didn't put it there. I don't know where it came from. I'm just really learning that it's something that God's put there, and navigating that with him, fleshing that out, what that is. But it's definitely an Israel. It's definitely an ancient thing. And that's why I feel like he's calling us back to the Jewish roots of our Christianity, because there's the how. I'm unpacking that on my own and writing about that a lot. I haven't got to share it yet, because I'm actually living it too. But yeah, I think it's just about, you hear so much about this new, especially in Christian circles. And I feel like as I watch it and observe it, and I've tried it in my own life and it exhausts me, is we're always trying to create this new thing to sell, to make money, it's all just so yucky to me. It all feels yucky. And God is not new. There's nothing new under the sun. His way is ancient. I mean, he's wanted his family back from the very beginning. So he's all about family, having us come home to him. And I just believe with all my heart that's what he's doing culture-wide, like church-wide. He's turning that back around. And this striving and straining for the new thing all the time is kind of crazy to me. And it's stressful, and it creates chaos, and it doesn't give us time for rest and people and touching people and helping people. And I feel like we're so busy striving for this new stuff and trying to create all these new things that it doesn't leave time to genuinely help people, that are in pain. And how are we going to do that? Even be with our own families.
Right. I mean, I find it, in the family that I'm raising. I mean, the challenge of gathering around the table for a meal. I mean, it's significant based on all the things we've packed our lives with, all of the new things that we chase. And when I look back just a few years previous, and I think, wow, absolutely there was a time where we were better at making the time to gather around that table, both figuratively and literally. And as church communities, we used to be better at it. I remember back in the day, we'd have the church potluck, and there were no matchy cute napkins, and it wasn't all done up or anything. It was just everybody just pile in and contribute a little bit. And I actually was inspired to the point that I threw a old-fashioned church picnic for the women that I lead, and it was a really sweet day. And yet, for the majority of the women I lead, it just wasn't flashy enough. It was, we had a nice group show up and it was a great time, but it wasn't something that was wildly adopted like a different kind of an event. And I do think you're right. We do chase so often the thing that can be well branded and has the right optics and makes us feel like it's going to have this major spiritual goal at the end of it instead of just the goal of gathering. Yeah.
And it's pretty. We want things that are pretty, that are styled. And really, I think for the majority of the population, that's so far-fetched. To me, it's not Jesus. It's not that practical rescue. It's not help. I mean, I don't know. I just think it's wrong in almost every way.
Well, talk to me, too, about the fact that you said that in the childhood you were raised in, there was sort of this lack of understanding about what to do for you in this place where you felt like something was always wrong. But then you got married young and you started having children. And I'm assuming that place of not knowing how still remained in you through those early years of marriage and parenting. So how did that chase you? And when did you begin to realize something's got to change, or else I'm just going to keep repeating the same loop?
Oh, yeah, I think I keep repeating the same loop until recently, to be honest. I mean, I was always aware. I think the thing that I realize now that I didn't know then is God's wired me to see and feel the way I do. I walk all the time and I sense atmospheres. I see things. I feel people. I'm very way under the deep end of stuff. And I can't make that go away. And I'm learning now that that's just me. And that's good. That's the way God made me for a reason.
Right.
And because I see where people need help. But yeah, that followed me forever until really recently. It's these patterns of pain that very often are emotional wound memories, because it's like the enemy always does that to us as children, and we get stuck at some point, and that memory, that wound festers and gets infected, and that little part of us goes off in this direction, not just closets us, but leads us down dark halls and takes us further and further down in ourselves, and we have no place to go to tell someone those deep inner things about ourselves. It's more than just not drinking, smoking, cheating, cussing. It's loneliness. And what happens when that loneliness goes unmet? It's a lot of that inner stuff. So it's so much of the interior, the heart work that is heavy with me. That's the end where I feel like God is calling me and is working in me and through me. And I think it's that how to help people in all that area. I think it's the internal way more than the external.
Right. And when did you begin to realize that for your own children, you wanted to make a shift? I mean, because was there a moment where you thought, okay, I don't want this to continue on into the next generation? Because you write a lot about legacy. Legacy is a big heartbeat word for me. So when did you have this sense of something has to change in order to create a legacy that I want to move forward?
Yeah, I think it finally got to where I wanted to leave in Tennessee when I came here. But although I was aware of that years before that, I actually took action on it. But I was aware of it for years before then. And it would frustrate me because I didn't know how. And I think because there was no human to help show me how, that God did. Like he intervenes, and it was his word. And it was like spending time with him every day and going to him and eating at the table every single day, eating his words and doing them. And he would show me. And so it was that, like, and the word would be like a handle up. So I take that word and it would give me up a little bit more and up a little bit more. So it was a very slow, arduous process, but it was taking me somewhere. It took me out. And I always taught the kids through all that. I was always teaching them, though, what God was teaching me and showing.
Right.
They were watching me.
And today, how do they reflect on that process of allowing their parent to learn in front of them to make a difference? How do they recall what that season was like?
So I would love to have my kids all interviewed, to be honest, because there's still a lot of pain, a lot of unresolved things. There's a lot of anger. They're mad, I think, kids, I was, because your mom won't leave. But they also watched me, like Grace has shared, that she watched me sit with God every day, and that changed her. There's a lot of things, both positive and negative, I'm sure.
Right. Now, unpack for me what you mean by legacy. Because again, as I was telling you earlier, I love that word, and I would love to hear what your pursuit of family legacy is for yours.
Yeah, I think it's truth telling. Around the table, I want my house, my everything, me, to be safe, to tell the truth to learn how to communicate everything, like to see my kids the way that God has wired them and encourage them in that way. But I think it's the little that I know I want to teach them and leave them, realizing that I probably won't live to see it all, but that little that I know that I've learned that I can pass to them like a baton, pass down, and they can take that little, and they're not going to be as stuck as I was. They're generational, and I really believe in so many ways that God's reaching back to the original wound in so many places in our family line that the grandkids won't even have that. And I can see the things that he's done already, and just my yes and my stepping out. I don't know. There's so many things. There's risk of failing, and I think in so many ways I failed, but in so many other ways there's been so much healing and restoration. I just think it's living vulnerable. I do. I feel like vulnerability is almost everything, and not hiding things and not keeping secrets. And for me, that's been the biggest and hardest. Of being vulnerable, living that way is also risky because you're hurt all the time, in a lot of ways.
Right. And you're allowing people in who can hurt when you're vulnerable. But I think vulnerability is also a place of great courage, because it takes tremendous courage to be vulnerable and for our kids to be able to see that. And that's part of allowing those misfits to come around the table, right? Because sometimes there may be a misfit that shows up that they're still so wounded, all they know to do is wound. And so when we are trying to be as vulnerable as we can, those people will show up. Back with Tiffani after this great opportunity from World Concern. Over 1 million. That's the number. Over 1 million children are trafficked in the world's poorest places. And that number can sound really overwhelming, but there is something you can do to help. On May 11th, join World Concern for the SOS 5K in Seattle. You and your family can run for a cause, whether that's actually hitting the pavement with us or by donating to help stop child trafficking worldwide. The SOS 5K is a number that can help end the number of over 1 million children who are trafficked. Go to sos5k.org to register or to donate today. That's the World Concern SOS 5K in Seattle, Washington, May 11th. Make a difference by going to sos5k.org. Now, you have talked about that, you had a history with toxic relationships. So how have you tried to stay in a place of vulnerability and yet appropriate protection of yourself in those places?
I love that question. I'm actually navigating that too, as God is moving with me in that. Because again, I see so much of Christians, and I'm saying me too, you hear a lot of this now of looking down on people who are toxic, or looking down on people who wound people, or don't get saved, or can't get their life together, or messes, or whatever. And we are drawing, again, another line of keeping Jesus away from them, like that generous reaching down and lifting up that God's known for. His justice and righteousness is a generous reaching down and lifting up that he's done for me. And I want to do that for other people. And I think it's learning to keep myself safe. But I think now that he's restoring me, that I have more guts and strength about me, that I can go back in some places. And I'm not saying to go back into unsafe relationships. Right. I'm not saying that. But in my instance, it's changed everything. It's because it was me first. Like, I think so often we look at all relationships, even abusive ones, and think it's the other person, and it's really not. because there's things in me that through writing the book that God showed me patterns that it floored me. I thought, oh my God, and it just changed the game because it takes two people. It's not okay to beat people or hit people or any of those things. But at the same time, I think it's given me a grace and an understanding and empathy for other people and where their stories and what they've walked through that we don't often think about as children. Where have they come from and what's their story of origin and what was their parents' story of origin? And then you can see the patterns. It's very interesting.
I love that you're talking about writing this book as this really incredible process, because for those of you who may not be familiar with this, when you write a nonfiction book, you go in with like the most intense homework assignment ever, which is called a book proposal. And that book proposal lays out all the things you're going to say and what it's going to be like. And you're going to do these chapters, and these are going to be the different stories and the examples in the chapter. And this is going to be the point of the whole book. And then you actually start writing the book, and there's theory and then there's practicum. And right. So it sounds like in your case, I think it would be just kind of amazing to go look at your original proposal and then this process that you walked through all the way through. How did the book end up being something in ways that was familiar to you, where you thought you were headed, and where did it end up being something that you're like, okay, Lord, what have we just birthed here?
Oh yeah, I said that, like, this is not belonging. I remember so far through it, like, this is not about belonging. It was like, if you're going to tell the truth, Tiff, you got to tell the truth. So it was going to that place because God really wrote the story. He really did. Right. And it was watching the way he was writing it. And I was like, oh my gosh, because things like I had to stop for a while. I got stuck. There was nothing. And I knew he wanted me to go to Texas. So I followed the breadcrumb to Texas. So it was literally, not only was I moving internally with him, I was physically moving and following breadcrumbs while I was writing, because he wanted to show me something. Like he wanted to, and he's very much a show and tell father. And I love that about him, because I'm not just you can tell me something, but I have to see it with my own eyes and touch it and taste it and smell it and all those things. And that's what he does.
I love that. And I love that you had the willingness to follow, even when it was going off page, even when it was going beyond what you had originally proposed and put out there. That I think it's such a great act of courage to be willing to do that, and for your publisher to hang in there with you and let you take the journey. I think that's incredible.
They really, really were.
So what is your prayer for people who pick up this book, who go to your website, who encounter you online? What is the one thing, the one heartbeat that you would love for each of them to take away?
I think the first thing is always that they would let God find them and bring them home. Because it's, for me, like, there is no other home you'll ever find like him. And he's a real person. And, God, but he's real. I would love to be a part of somehow helping people get to know him in a very real way, and that he does offer how. And I also want to be a part of helping people learn the how, so that we can set up heart hospitals and lighthouses in every neighborhood, so that there's no street that doesn't have a table and doesn't have a safe home, and, all those things. There's such a vision there that he's given me for all of that.
Well, I think you're definitely on to something, and I can't wait for people to encounter the Misfit Table. And again, I keep seeing these beautiful applications. I think God's up to something. One of our very popular episodes was with Kristen Schell and her turquoise table movement, and Jenny Allen and all she's doing with IF, and Susie Davis. And, I definitely am seeing this as a movement and a heartbeat amongst people, because there is this desire to gather, to be accepted, to look one another face to face, but also to discover God there. And so I am just so thrilled to see where your journey takes you next.
Thank you.
Tiffani, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate it.
Connect with Tiffani on Instagram at House of Belonging, and connect with me on the socials at Julie Lyles Carr. Big props to Donna Tody and Rebecca Beckett, our amazing producer and content coordinator. Tell them thanks by subscribing to the Modern Motherhood Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and by leaving a 5-star rating and review, and we might just feature your review on an upcoming episode. Check out AllMomDoes.com and AllMomDoes on the socials for inspiration and community for your mothering journey. I'll see you next week on the Modern Motherhood Podcast.